Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to episode 56 of the ESG show. And today we are talking about compliance, all things compliance, and we're asking the question, is compliance a mirage? Is it just lip service? Now, I don't like compliance. I say that because I Googled it. And I Googled, why don't I like compliance? And 5 reasons came up. And I got it from this article. I'll show you the article. And I put the link to this article, by the way, in the comments section, if you're interested. And it came up with 5 reasons. And I would say, in fairness, it came up with responses to those 5 questions. It came up with a say, well, yeah, but kind of answer. Because it's boring, because it's just common sense. Compliance, people think everything's a problem. Compliance lives in the past, and compliance is unnecessary. So I thought I would ask our guests this morning those 5 questions. I'm not going to ask them each of them, those 5 questions. We'll ask 1 question each. And on the show with us this morning is Sneha. Hello, Sneha. How are you?
Hello, Michael. Good to be here.
Yeah, good to have you. And where are you right now?
Well, I have joined from London.
From London. Well, welcome. Sneha, I have a question for you. Is compliance boring?
Well, I'd say we're tackling a question that's been lurking in the shadows of ESG conversations. Is compliance enabling real progress or just papering over cracks in the system? So at the moment, compliance doesn't exactly scream innovation or transformation, and it sounds more like ticking boxes or avoiding fines and doing just enough to stay out of trouble. But I think, and that's where in the world of ESG, where ambition often collides with reality, compliance is either the silent hero or the perfect scapegoat. But let's dive into it today.
Okay, so it's either the silent hero or the scapegoat. Okay, now, Ruchi, I'll call you up rather than your profile. Hello, Ruchi. Can you tell us about compliance? It's just common sense, isn't it?
So that's a good question. I think compliance is not just common sense. There is a lot involved. And I think it's more than just common sense in the sense that there's a lot of due diligence and a lot of effort that companies put in to make sure that they are putting out products that are compliant. They are in the market and really trying to be compliant to many different regulations. And then the scope is just never ending. You have regulations, of course, ESG, which is coming up to be too much hyped. But you also have the product safety regulations, you have supply chain regulations, finance, trade compliance, so on and so forth. So I think when you say that it's just common sense, that would be so difficult to agree to. Then I would lose my job. I am a compliance manager, so I would say that it's just so important. I mean, whenever you see a statement that says a product is compliant, a lot has gone into it. I mean, before signings, that someone has really put in a lot of effort.
Thanks, Richie. Well, to let you into a secret, I don't like it when people say something's common sense because I find things are rarely common sense, except when that comes to assembling a wardrobe, under which circumstances I discover I don't have any common sense whatsoever. But anyway, Bernard. Hello, Bernard. And where are you today?
Hello, you're Michael. So I have joined in
from Ghana.
Hello, can you hear me, Michael?
Well,
yes,
we can hear you fine. All the way from Ghana. And Bernard, can you tell us, does compliance just live in the past?
Okay, so that's more of an interesting perspective, right? And it's something I would like to offer a different lens to. So typically you would see compliance professionals as people who see everything as a problem, right? But then that's not the case. They have just been trained to look at the risk that people might ordinarily overlook. And then their main concern is not to create obstacle to begin with, but to look at how the business can operate profitably and avoid some legal pitfalls. So the whole perception that compliance everything is a problem for compliance people. It's necessarily from how they are trained to look at gaps. So that is the issue. But then the goal is not to flag issues just because they are issues and then they exist, but it's to look at a way to balance regulatory requirements with the strategic direction of the particular organization, right? So if you bring it to the ESG context, compliance forces business leaders to ask the tough questions that they sometimes do not want to. And then they force you to look at your implementation plan with more of a transparent lens to it. And then this is how you're able to create impact beyond the short term. So yes, for me, I look at compliance as something that is not necessarily a problem. And it's not something that lives in the past either.
All right. Thank you for that, Bernard. And also on the show today, we have Frederick. Hello, Frederick. I believe you are dialing in from Wales today.
That's right, Mike. Good morning, or rather good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Or it's good morning if you're tuning in America. So Frederick, I wanted to ask you: do compliance people, they just think everything's a problem? Is everything is that fair? Do you think?
Yeah, I think when it comes to compliance, it can become, if it is thought to be just for one person's problem, right? But it was very interesting to hear the thoughts of Ruchi, Sneha, and Bernard, right? But on the ESG front, right, when you look at compliance, it's everybody's problem, right? And that's why I think it becomes really interesting for everyone to be part of the process to understand what compliance is about, because it's a very dynamic space on the ESG compliance side. Because it's evolving as we speak. It's trying to become more relevant, more current, and a bit more future risk proof. So I think when it comes to ESG, I think there's a huge potential for it to be seen less of a compliance tick box opportunity, but as Bernard mentioned, as a business opportunity. For the leaders to see how they become a bit more aware of the near and present risks of not just the business risks, but what ESG presents as potential risks to their own business, and how they can really evolve from and transform their businesses to become a bit more future-proof.
Okay, thank you for that. And now I'm going to ask you all a question. And there's going to be a little bit of duplication here because I think some of you has partially answered this question anyway. But so the criticism is compliance is painful and unnecessary. I'll give you all 30 seconds on that one. Who wants to go first? Anyone want to put their hand up for that one, or shall I pick you out? I'll tell you what. I'll pick you out by alphabetical order, which is going to be you, Bernard, I think. So, is it painful and unnecessary? Yeah, sorry, you're on mute again, I think, Bernard.
Okay, so I would argue that compliance is only painful when it's misunderstood or when you treat it as a checkbox exercise. See, Mike, it's all about the approach here, right? So whether you see it as a necessary evil or as something that is supposed to become a strategic enabler for your business, if you look at it from the point of it being a necessary evil, then it's going to be burdensome, right? Once it's disconnected from your business goals and it just looks like some other practice that you have in parallel to your actual operations that you have going on. But then allow me to flip the narrative. Compliance, especially if we look at it from our ESG perspective, it's not just about paying fines or satisfying your regulator or a big man with a cane standing somewhere chasing you. It's about building trust. So you can look at compliance more from the perspective of who your stakeholders are, look at it from a very diverse view. And then you can be able to identify opportunities. Then you're going to look at compliance as being very necessary and not painful. Because the real pain comes from misalignment. And that's something that I will keep emphasizing on today's discussion that we're having. Okay.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think, Frederick, you're next in alphabetical order, even though your surname begins with an R.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just painful and unnecessary?
I don't think so. It's current and relevant. I think it provides a kind of an opportunity for businesses to transform. And when I look at ESG, it also links in with other policy frameworks. We've seen the EU Green Taxonomy, and now the ESG directive is also going to be shaped on some of the principles of the EU Green Taxonomy, which will also then bring in a channel of finance to support organizations on this transition. Because you have cities, you have organizations, you have countries on this journey of net zero, either up to 20, 40, 50, or 70. Now, on this transformation journey, if they have to comply with some of these standards, there needs to be finance, which needs to be pulled in. And with ESG, there's an opportunity for companies to see how they can make themselves a bit more aligned and to generate trust as well. So alignment and trust, which was mentioned by Bernard, right? But to get that and to see how they can seek finance to support them on the transition on this journey.
Okay, thank you for that. Alignment and trust. What about you, Ruchi? I think you're next in alphabetical order.
Yeah, I think I would say it's not unnecessary. I would just go back a little in time, maybe in the 19th century, if you ask someone, maybe they had a different opinion then. The companies were more profit focused in that era. But today, in today's time, I think it's just too much necessary, I would say, not just necessary. It's just because it helps you in your ESG reporting. It helps you ensure that your consumer feels safe. They have to be protected in all means. It means that you know what you're putting on the market is safe, also for your own self, because you don't want to be part of any of these compliance breaches. You don't want to be at stake, putting your reputation on the block, saying that, oh no, that particular company is putting out something that's not compliant. No, that's not how you want to do the business now the business, and it's not just business, the stakeholders, the consumers, the investors, everybody is interested in how you are ethically strong, how you have your ESG strategy in place. So I think it's just not the right time to say that it's unnecessary.
All right, okay. And finally, Sneha, I would imagine you've been haunted by this all your life with a surname beginning with Y, always being asked. What are your thoughts about this? Painful.
Well, I think, yeah, completely echoing everyone's thoughts. I think without compliance, companies risk penalties, there's reputational damage, and also losing investor trust. So imagine, claiming to be sustainable, but also getting caught polluting. So no one wants to invest in that from an investor lens. But at the same time, compliance also ensures transparency. So for investors, it means that they can trust that their money is genuinely supporting sustainable and ethical practices, not just marketing buzzwords like greenwashing being one of them. And I think Frederick tried mentioning this, but compliance, I think, from my understanding, it's also like a referee in a football game. Like it ensures everyone plays by the rules. So it's definitely very necessary right in today's time. And without it, like without compliance, I think even the best ESG strategies, they can fail because of missteps or miscommunication. And for example, in Europe, if a fund claims to be green but doesn't meet the EU taxonomy criteria, I think it could face fines or investors' backlash. So I think compliance makes sure that we do not make such mistakes. And yeah, I think definitely very necessary in today's world, and looking at it from an ESG, and it's very investor driven as well.
All right. Okay. Thank you for that. So I suppose the analogy there with the football game was that everyone has to be compliant when playing football. For example, not touching the ball or trying to score a goal offside or something, I suppose. Now, I want to run a brief video from a US politician and entrepreneur, many of you will have heard of, called Vivek Ramaswamy. And it's a 50-second video, and then we're going to have a little bit of a discussion about it. I think this is quite
ESG is a social credit system that scores companies according to whether or not they're abiding by the new vision for American capitalism. So it's the scoring system for stakeholder capitalism. Think about it as a social credit system. It stands for environmental, social, and governance factors. And it refers to a new template that companies have to use in addition to the old templates they used to use to decide how they allocate capital in their businesses, how they build their businesses, how they hire people, how they invest in new projects, how they invest in other companies, to say that it no longer is just the long run profitability of those projects that matters, but that it is also an added matrix of environmental, social, and governance factors that need to be taken into account. That's a fancy way of saying actually certain progressive political.
Okay, so I think the key thing I wanted to say there is that Vivek Ramaswamy says it's no longer the long-run profitability of a company that matters, but also an added matrix of environmental, social, and governance. Now, I'm not sure that's right, is it? Are we saying that ESG means that in addition to the long-run profitability of a company, there's something else that's also important? Or are we saying that ESG is consistent with the long-run profitability of a company? Who wants to have a go at answering that question first? Any volunteers?
Yeah, I can go. I can go first, Mike. Vivek was very interesting even in the presidential campaign, right? He really raised quite a few eyebrows. But on his view on this, right, and when you look and to answer your question about is it an additional one, I think it isn't really going to become a totally different one. Yes, organizations will need to start preparing this information for and gathering the information as much. But I think what it does, it brings into perspective, into an opportunity to measure, monitor, and report the performance of these companies when it comes to environmental. But when you're not just looking at environment in isolation, and not just looking at water, waste, and energy, but also linking it with the social and the governance aspect of organizations, which is, I think, one of the key essential ingredients of the ESG one, which becomes then an overarching aspect for these organizations. And I think for organizations, here's an opportunity to use these frameworks to drive performance. So it's an opportunity for them to show stewardship, to show leadership, in their own sectors. And it can also position themselves as leaders when it comes to ESG stewardship. Can also give them a significant competitive edge in some of these markets, because if you look at some of these markets, when you look at some of the ESG metrics, some of these companies can really suffer if they're really at the bottom end. So here's an opportunity, if the companies are doing well, to be able to measure, monitor, and report some of these, to be able to drive both their own performance, but also make sure they're positioning themselves in a better fashion compared to the peers in the space.
Okay, thank you for that. And does anybody else want to come in on that point, on the video by Vivek Ramaswamy about ESG being profitability, long-term profitability is one metric, ESG is another. Anybody else got anything to say about that? Ruchi?
Yeah. So I think this is very true when Frederick said that you cannot have the environmental issues isolated, because I think they are going to impact not just the consumers, but also the companies themselves. So I think when you put ESG into your strategy, you're also mitigating your own risks. I think if we talk about climate, I think if the climate and the CO2 emissions are not tackled today, and if they're not taken up by all these producers and the big manufacturers, then I think it will also be an issue for them. So I think it's just how you look at it. It's the perspective. I think if you have a culture developed, so I think what ESG is trying is to bring it in. It's trying to incorporate it into your normal day-to-day work. It's like a strategy that you work with at your company. It's not like you just report and then you sit back. No, it's like a strategy. It's like ongoing. It's a journey. And nobody is forcing you to do everything right away, right today. It's about how you find out the risk. You have an opportunity, you have a risk, and then you have some ways you want to tackle that. So the reporting part is about how you are dealing with it. It's just about what is your current status, what is your future plan. It's not that you just change everything from today and say, okay, now we are all done. That's not even possible. So I think you just have to look at it. You have to think of it as a cultural bit, ingrained into our working style.
Okay, thank you for that. And does anybody else want to come in on this point?
Yeah, I'd say more like, the ESG landscape is also subject to political and market fluctuations. For instance, there's an FT report, and, they say that there has been a noticeable trend of outflows from ESG funds, with $40 billion withdrawn so far in 2024. This is partly due to rising oil prices and also political polarization. So I think looking at it from the compliance standpoint, I think compliance functions must be agile enough to adapt to such changes, or at the same time ensuring that ESG strategies remain effective and also aligned with both regulatory requirements and market expectations. And this is also about like mitigating greenwashing risks. So and looking at states like the US, for example, the politicization of ESG, and particularly in that region, I think that also presents challenges that compliance teams must navigate. So despite political backlash, the expansion of green economy that continues, the compliance functions also play a role in ensuring that ESG initiatives are implemented effectively. And that's also without falling prey to political pressures. So I'd say it's also, I wouldn't say like it's mandatory, but it's also about how you do it and what are the kind of check boxes that you'd like to take, and how you navigate it essentially in the market. Looking from a financial market standpoint.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Does anybody, Bernard, have you anything to say on that, or would you be happy
Yes,
to move
Michael.
on?
So
Bernard, go. All right.
yes, Michael. Interestingly, this is a take that we hear quite often in my line of work, right? And if you didn't know better, you would think it's designed necessarily to be some sort of bait for rich, because honestly put, it's a reductive take on what ESG is really about, right? He puts it as if ESG is meant to be mutually exclusive from profitability, whilst in essence, they are deeply interconnected. Just that ESG looks at it more from a longer term view. And even if you look at it from all the regulations that are emerging from ESG, trying to promote ESG, it's not carrying any sort of political agenda. That is not the main point. From my experience, regulations are mostly designed to make businesses more resilient, more adaptive, and to be able to meet the evolving expectations that society has of these businesses in the long term, right? So even if you look at it from, let's take, for example, an industry that is highly connected to climate risk. Now, you might have a company today who decide that they are going to ignore climate risk, and they are going to be seen as being profitable today, more profitable relative to the other companies who are taking it in their stride. Now, over the longer term, they're going to face more regulatory fines. There's going to be some reputational damage and operational issues, disruptions, and all that comes in. And over that longer term, you realize that the other companies who are taking ESG more seriously and implementing it as part of their strategy, you're going to find that these companies have built more loyalty with their stakeholders, and they have even become more efficient. So for me, the problem is not necessarily in how he puts it. It's more about the way the communication is being framed, making it seem more of an obligation than it's being something that is connected, playing side by side with profitability and growth.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have a brief chat with Ruchi, and then I'm going to introduce Sneha to the story, and then I'm going to bring Bernard in, and then after that, Sneha and Frederick are going to have a brief chat. But Ruchi, let me introduce you properly. So Ruchi has expertise in client strategy development with a focus on key environment and product compliance regulations. She is a specialist in global market access with regulatory perspective. She's currently working as a product compliance manager in Copenhagen. Wonderful, wonderful Copenhagen, I believe. There's a song about that, isn't there? She has extensive product development experience prior from the telecom industry and holds a master's in IC design. I'm not quite sure what IC design stands for, actually. integrated circuit. What does IC stand for?
Integrated circuits, yes.
Oh, I got it right. Oh, okay. Holds a master's degree in IC design from Imperial College London as a Commonwealth scholar. So, Ruchi, I wanted to ask you, what is compliance?
Yeah, I think I'll just do it a little bit piece by piece. What is compliance? What I think is that, in simple terms, we can say any adherence to your legal relevant regulations, that is what is compliance. But I think, said that, it's not at all that simple as it looks like. It is just too deep. There are too many regulations, like I always say. And I think the most important aspect of compliance is that you want to ensure that you're putting onto the market a safe product, not just for your own customer or the end user, but also for the environment in general, for the entire planet, because you have to have that long term vision of what you put in the market. How is it impacting the planet? Maybe your product contains a substance that later goes down into the water, pollutes the water, and impacts the planet in a very, very harmful way. So all of this has to be dealt with, and this is where compliance comes into play. And I think what also compliance does is give you a lot of market access. So we are not just talking about, doing very good in terms of the environment and all, but it's also about the profitability, the growth of the company. How do you generate revenues? So the market access part is that when you enter a market, you have to be certain that you are meeting all the regulations into that region, into that country. I think that is what compliance is. It's about strategizing how much you want to do to be able to meet the requirements on one hand and to ensure that your company grows at a very good pace. I mean, a compliance manager as such, he's going to be wearing a number of hats. He needs to know the design, he needs to know the regulation, needs to know what the company wants in terms of the growth, in terms of the sales, all of it put together, and then come down to a policy. So all of this is just not simple. It's just too complicated, too complex, but then of course it can be done right if you have the right strategy, the right procedures around it in your company. This is basically it. And I will just give you two small examples on how compliance is also helping solve issues in the society. So one of the examples, and it's about two companies that have come in. So one of the examples is the Too Good to Go. This is one of these Nordic companies, basically started in Copenhagen, which deals with the issues of food waste. So, and where did all of this come in? This comes in from when people are trying to look at issues, when people are trying to be compliant to regulations, when they see there is an issue out there. So, what this company does is that it takes all sorts of food waste, but then not put it into the waste, but to put it to good use. So, it'll take waste or maybe the food leftovers from restaurants, from your office canteen, from various different places where it is possible, and then put it out into the market. So they have the surprise bag concept. So you get a surprise bag from these stores, and then what you get is a leftover, but then it's still good enough for you. So that is just one example. The other one is Fair Phones. I think most of us have heard about it. And then the way they work and how it all started. They were initially inspired by a compliance awareness on the conflict minerals. So they started from working on an awareness session, and that drove them to start a company like Fair Company. So they have today, we proudly say that they have all ethically sourced materials that they used in their phones. So, I mean, compliance is just bringing about revolution. It's not just about taking your time or you're wasting your money, but it's also about revolutionizing, solving problems. So that's how I would put it.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And could you just talk us through this slide, convergence with compliance and ESG? If you could try and make it quite quick.
Yeah, so I think compliance and ESG converge a lot. So initially, when people just started saying that, okay, ESG, meaning that you'll have to do a lot of new stuff, new work, but that's not exactly what it is, because compliance is converging and having a lot of interplay there. A lot of what you do as part of compliance goes into the ESG reporting. And here I want to tell you in the slide that there is a supplier level ESG reporting that you have to do, and then there's the product compliance that you do. But all of what you do in product compliance can be mapped on to some of these European sustainability standards, like I talk about here. And then you can use all of your data, quantitative or qualitative, from compliance into ESG. So basically, it's all so intertwined that whatever you do is really impacting your ESG at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you for that, Ruchi. I want to bring Sneha on now. I'll bring you back in a moment, Ruchi, if that's okay. So Sneha, you've got over 9 years of experience and has covered sustainability lending, sustainability structured finance, and supported debt capital markets on green, social, and sustainable bonds. You've also contributed to projects in sustainable investments and worked across fixed income spectrum. In 2024, Sneha was hired as the head of ESG and responsible investing to promote a strategic approach to institutional clients and provide added value to enhance engagement with Astant Global Management. And Sneha began her career at JP Morgan Asset Management, where she led ESG initiatives from a fixed income lens. She has since developed a strong focus on green finance, sustainable finance, and climate finance, establishing herself as an expert in these areas. So, Sneha, I just wanted to ask you, what is ESG compliance?
Well, at its core, ESG compliance ensures that companies follow rules and standards which are related to environmental sustainability, social responsibility, and ethical governance in their operations and reporting. And I think compliance acts as a springboard on how the teams must ensure consistency between corporate claims and underlying practices to avoid reputational damage.
Okay, thank you for that, Sneha. And now I want to bring on Frederick. Frederick, we're not going to, Sneha's going to have a chat with you in a minute, but I thought I would introduce you to everybody so that everybody knows who you are. So Frederick Royan is the Global Practice Area Leader for Sustainability and Circular Economy Practice at Frost & Sullivan, a company I'm very familiar with, by the way. The focus of the SCE program is on unlocking growth opportunities of water, energy and resource, regenerative recovery and resilience across cities and industry value chains. He has a master's in environmental protection and management from the University of Edinburgh and secured as a centenary Chevening. If I pronounce that right, Chevening.
Chevening, that's right, yeah.
Scholar. And he has conferred the Frost & Sullivan Fellowship and is the chair of the Smart Water Network Forum. So Frederick, or Fred, Sneha's going to be chatting to you shortly. So I just wanted everyone to know who you are, and you'll be back on shortly. I'll just very quickly introduce Bernard now, and I have got a couple of questions for you, Bernard. Bernard Owusu Ansar is a manager in KPMG's Ghana Risk Consulting Services, specializing in ESG and sustainability advisory, risk management, compliance, and impact assessment. He has led high impact projects to enhance transparency and accountability for organizations across the telecoms, finance, government, and international development sectors. With a finance background and specialized certification in sustainability, governance, compliance, and audit, Bernard has also facilitated ESG and corporate governance training sessions for boards of several institutions, both financial and non-financial. Well, thank you for joining us, Bernard. Sorry if I messed up your name earlier. Perhaps you could correct me on the pronunciation there.
Oh, you're welcome, Michael. My name is Bernard Owusu-Ansah. I think you said it quite right, so there's no problem.
I think I said it right. I didn't get the accent right, did I? Really, I didn't put the right emphasis, exactly. But I think I kind of got it right. So, Bernard, you are based in sub-Saharan Africa, where small, medium-sized enterprises dominate the markets, and where you deal with the perception, with the perception that ESG compliance is a Western agenda, where advising client companies that face different socio-economic challenges. In your view, how do these organizations address the tension between their financial goals and their need to comply with all the ESG regulations? And also there's the issue of it being a Western agenda, though, as well. Can you just give us some brief thoughts on that?
Well, Michael, so just as I said earlier to the question from Vivek, the opinion that Vivek posted earlier, it's similar, right? It's a crucial question, and then it reflects the reality of many SMEs in these parts of the world, right? So the perception is often tied to the fact that most of the global frameworks that come up do not necessarily reflect our own socioeconomic challenges. We have our own pressing issues down here, things like limited infrastructure or even getting access to capital in the first place. Whether you're being sustainable or not is a big challenge, amongst other issues, right? So, however, to address it or to hit the nail right on the head, we need to look at ways that SMEs can still survive, can still remain profitable whilst being able to implement ESG. And what we typically tell our clients whenever we come into contact with any SME is that you need to start small. It's very important that you start small. You need to know where to start, prioritize the impact. So with the resources that you have, you can still start with the same resources. Look at the ways, look at more from the local context and leverage the resources that you have, leverage partnerships that you can use to build, and then be able to report on it as and when. And also to look out for any sustainable funds that they can get to be able to implement some of the initiatives that they have. This is one of the key ways that you can go about it. So for me, with the SMEs, in my experience, it's more about getting the mindset shift, which is more important. Because if they look at ESG as a burden, just as some of the bigger corporations with compliance functions and not also looking at it from, then we are off to a bad start to begin with. But if they look at it more as a pathway to efficiency, to their long-term competitiveness, and then to even innovation, then they are on the right path to implementing ESG in the right way.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. I thought we could play a bit of a game now, a game that's quite popular on the ESG show, Hot and Cold. And I want to... Has Bernard disappeared? Are you still there, Bernard? I think Bernard's gone. Anyway, I'm sure Bernard's trying to log back in again. Definitely vanished. Anyway, Bernard, please log back in and I'll call you back up. I wanted to ask you the question, is compliance a mirage? Hot and cold. Hot meaning, Bernard's coming back. Hello, Bernard. Good to have you back. The question is compliance a mirage, hot or cold? Hot means, yeah, it's a mirage. Cold means, no, not really. So, Zaniha, I believe this was your question originally. So I think I'm going to ask you to answer it first.
Well, I think, it just depends on how we approach ESG compliance. So if it's treated as a box ticking exercise, then yes, it risks becoming a mirage. Think of it as starting at a green oasis from afar, only to find that it's just sand when you get closer. So that's what happens when compliance is all about optics and not substance. So also let's look at UK pension funds as an example. Some funds faced intense backlash for divesting from fossil fuels, with critics arguing that these moves conflicted with their fiduciary duty to deliver maximum returns for retirees. On one side, you have ESG goals pushing for greener investments, and on the other, fiduciary obligations pulling towards traditional assets. So this is where compliance walks a tightrope, and I think it has to balance the regulatory push for sustainability with the expectation of financial prudence. And when compliance becomes just about saying no to certain investments without creating viable alternatives, then I think it risks being as superficial and a mirage of progress that fails to deliver substance. But at the same time, when compliance is done right, it's all about finding pathways forward. It's about aligning fiduciary duties with ESG goals by integrating long-term sustainability risks also into financial decision-making. So it's about saying yes, we can achieve returns while investing responsibly. So is compliance a mirage? It can be, if it's purely about restrictions. But when compliance mediates between stakeholders or regulators, investors, beneficiaries, then it transforms into a bridge that connects financial realities with sustainability imperatives. And the question is, are we willing to build that bridge, or are we content with the kind of illusions that we have? So I think that's the danger. Compliance done wrong, it becomes a facade indeed.
Okay. Well, by the way, we've got 100,000 viewers at the moment. Oh, no, sorry. I think that was a Mirage. See what I did there. We are running very, very short for time. So I thought I would just ask one more of you to answer this question. Who is particularly keen to have a go at this question? Is compliance a mirage? Does somebody want to?
I could take it, Mike. I think, especially when it comes to ESG, the shifting goalposts is really interesting, right? Because we've had timelines being set. There was even a very interesting documentary put out by the FT asking if the ESG party is over, right? So I think it's not over. I think it's going to take some time. Hopefully, the Mirage will realize an oasis soon. But I think the ball has been set in motion. There's been a lot of greenwashing, and it's been a space where I think the lack of standards has kind of led to a lack of credibility in the space. You had various listings, which have listed ESG rankings for companies with very, what should I say? I would say methodologies which are not really thought through. So it's a space that has needed a lot of regulation. The ESG directive, in the works in the European Union, I think is a step in the right direction. And hopefully with a bit of a policy intervention, with the right focus and the right impetus, I think hopefully the Mirage will realize into an oasis soon.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, however, is it just lip service? Who would like to answer the question? Is it just lip service? Let's pretend there's a question mark at the end of that one, shall we? And is it just lip service? Who wants to answer that?
Yeah, Michael, I'll take that.
Please do.
So I'm cold on that, right? It's far from being lip service. To me, compliance is fundamental, right? While it might seem tedious or sometimes even bureaucratic to get through some of these compliance paperwork to get things done the right way, trust me, it protects businesses and then stakeholders and then the entire business environment ecosystem that we are operating as in general. Imagine if there was no need to stick to any regulatory issues or there was no big man with a cane. Imagine the kind of things that some businesses would be doing. And imagine even with businesses that are regulated, if there was no compliance functions, you would think about all the things that could come up from this particular chaotic situation that the business will find itself in. So we need to relook it with the view of it being more of a baseline where we ensure that that's the minimum standard of accountability and transparency that the business needs to operate on. And this could be on both sides, be it businesses and even the businesses that are investors, as in the PE firms and all these financial institutions, right? And then the companies that are going to be benefiting from funds. The challenge arises when companies treat compliance as the ceiling. That's something that they are trying to reach. So they are looking at it more from, and then it becomes performative in nature, right? That's when lip service becomes the case. And for some people too, they treat compliance as more of a branding issue. They look at it more from a branding issue. But when you look at compliance as something that you integrate into your culture, you see the real value out of it. So it's not just lip service for me.
Okay, thank you for that. And Ruchi, you fancy answering a question about it being lip service?
Yes, I would truly take this one. So I think, no, it's not just a lip service. You cannot be in a boat and say that, no, I'm far away from the water. If you are in the market, you ought to be compliant. And how you do it, I think that is more important. You have to know what the regulation is really talking about. And yes, like Bernard said, the regulations are extensive and they're bureaucratic. But then there's always a very good way of interpreting the regulation. And then there's all help available, there's all awareness available. And also at every company, you have the legal department, you have the compliance department, all of them can work together and try to find out, like, how do you strategize in such a way that compliance becomes important for your company. And it, like Bernard already said, it's also trying to bring in a lot of profits, a lot of market access for you. It's also gaining a lot of trust by your own customers, by your investors, and just on an average, all the stakeholders that are involved.
Okay, thank you for that. And now we've got one more question. Is compliance...
Can I have a quick go at the compliance just
Yes, of
being
course,
so
fine.
I have,
Of
like,
course.
although I definitely agree to what Bernard and Ruchi mentioned, I think looking at very recent scandals, I think compliance sometimes has felt to be like the bare minimum. For example, if we look at the very recent Volkswagen emission scandal, so they were compliant on paper, even gaming emissions tests to meet the regulations, but that was under the hood, and I think that was deception at its core, and also like compliance gone like completely cold when the focus was just on appearances rather than the impact. And also looking at the recent HSBC greenwashing case, they ran ads promoting their green initiatives while continuing to finance billions in fossil fuel projects. They tick some boxes, sure, but does that make them sustainable? I don't think so, and like absolutely not. So the UK Advertising Standards Authority, which is like the UK ASA, they wasn't having it. They banned the ads, sending a loud message to also financial institutions that these misaligned claims and actions will not go unnoticed. So I think at these stages, and looking at very recent examples, compliance hasn't been a safeguard, for HSBC or like a Volkswagen. It became a glaring example that way of greenwashing, and at the same time of reputational damage that follows. So this is like a smokescreen. Indeed, we know that this is what's required, but looking at it, in its most asinine form, like you mentioned, it can be a crutch sometimes, like just checking boxes, producing reports, and chasing green ratings while ignoring the elephant in the room. So I'm not sure if we are actually making a difference on that note, but yeah, just wanted to put this out here. And if we are ensuring compliance, if it's just the starting line or if it's the finish line, I think that's where it like gets hot.
All right. Okay. Thank you. And finally, is compliance good business? Let's pull everyone on for this. I do want to answer this question quite quickly, though. Who wants to go first? Fred, you seem to be moving in a microphone direction.
Sure, I can take this. I think it lines up interestingly with an interesting framework which we launched last year called the Policies to Platforms, right? How can compliance really mean business? And what our 6P framework, in the past, people talked about the triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit, right? We came up with our own 6P framework of policies to platform. But I think, when you start with the policy and ending up as a platform, it's quite important to take the journey and understand policies really influence right now the actual design of products and services. How you design a product and reducing the footprint of a product and enhancing the handprint of a product is quite crucial. And that's really driving change right from the life cycle analysis of products, digital product passports, and the likes. So the design of products is really taking shape. The third P is all about processes. We're seeing a significant influence of digital when it comes to sustainability, and this is really influencing how you can map these workflows and measure water, energy, and materials, and the synergies between these three, which really then gives you an opportunity to address them. The fourth one is people and persona. When you talk about sustainability, it's all about how you're going to understand the skills and expertise of people and how you can drive productivity at the people and persona level to drive sustainability. Then it becomes a very strong business opportunity. And the fifth is partnerships. I think many of the speakers have alluded, with ESG and sustainability. And I think it was Ruchi's slide as well, about suppliers and the kind of, what should I say, manufacturers. It's a B2B opportunity, for people to come together and collaborate and benefit from the process. And the sixth piece is the platform piece. And the platform piece, longer gone are the days where people were getting away by just measuring, monitoring, and reporting. And as Neha mentioned as well, the greenwashing has taken a beating, for the right reasons. And there's going to be a lot of scrutiny of the ESG data. And going forward, I think that's also a good reason where the C-suite of these organizations now are taking ESG quite seriously, because in some cases, ESG metrics are linked to the remuneration of the executives of the leading organizations, and rightly so, right? I think that will really drive this entire link between compliance and business performance, so where the leaders are not only looking at ESG as a compliance toolkit, but also as a business driver for growth.
Okay, and anybody else want to come in on the question, is compliance good business?
Yeah, I could do that. Just not take more time, but just to add on. So I think, yes, everybody is saying that there's a lot of greenwashing, and how is it that the compliance will safeguard the employee's image, the company's image and all of that. But I think the authorities are also realizing the same. And I think the audits and the assurance part of the ESG reporting is what could help, everyone to be on track to ensure that what you report, what you say is in alignment with the real figures. So I think that particular part, and then you can also always have an internal audit system working in your company to make sure that what you say is in alignment with what you're really doing. So that was just a small take on whether compliance is a good business or not.
Okay, all right, well, thank you for that. Now I'm going to hand over to Sneha and Frederick at this point. So I'm going to butt out. Over to you guys. You've got about 5 minutes. So if you suddenly see my face appearing on the screen, that means your time is nearly up. Okay.
Okay. Hi, Frederick. So my first question, in interest of time, Frederick, is compliance and ESG truly about driving meaningful change, or is it more about avoiding penalties and managing reputational risks? Let's hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I've already mentioned about the 6P framework, Sneha. So, but to give you some really tangible kind of, what should I say, examples, right? We did some piece of research looking at electrical and electronics, used electrical and electronics, right? And if you look at the volume of electric and electronics waste, right? I mean, all of us have numbers of mobile phones in our drawers, but the volume of electrical waste is growing, right? But what our research found is companies such as HP, right, are creating new revenue streams of collecting, refurbishing, and reselling some of their equipment, and as a result, they're able to increase their margins. That is quite a tangible proof that going on this ESG journey, you have these companies who are achieving not just ticking the boxes of compliance, but also are able to increase their financial metrics to a significant level. And going forward, it's a huge opportunity. I mean, we've seen even other organizations like Dell, they have a moonshot goal that they want to retrieve every single device that's out there, by 2030. And right now they retrieve around 20% of it, right? So, I think all industries are moving on this transition towards net zero, right? But in this transition, there is that compliance that they will have to meet. But there's an opportunity for them to see how they can see compliance as an opportunity to create new business and revenue streams for them and benefit from this transition.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Frederick. Yeah, I clearly understand that the change is happening, but we need to see more proof points, is what I'd also say, from all sectors, and mostly the hard-to-obey sectors. And with that, I'll move to the next question. But, and this is mostly aligned with the regulatory environment, which is also mostly driven by EU and UK. So with evolving regulations like the EU taxonomy and the UK's SDR, how do you think can compliance teams balance more clarity and action in an environment of ambiguity or ambiguous or controversial definitions of sustainability. I think as yet there is no clear definition of ESG or sustainability, and there are more than 43 or 47 definitions loitering around for these. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. The thing is, it is at a stage of, I would say, there is a certain amount of ambiguity simply because the process has just begun, right? So even if you look at the EU Green Taxonomy, they've just concluded 6 elements, and now they're looking at the different sectors and activities, right? So it'll take some time. They've, of course, some of the sectors that they've already tackled is the electricals, which is great, and the building space as well. There is talk that even in remote spaces such as space, there would be a green taxonomy in terms of how to address the environmental impacts of the significant growth of satellites in space, right? Aspects such as space debris and the likes, right? So it is an ambiguous space, but what I see and what is encouraging is, although EU led the EU Green Taxonomy, it's a taxonomy which is now taking shape in all geographies around the world and also shaping investment to the extent, one of the sectors I track is water. And when you look at water and sanitation, we have a goal, the SDG goal of 6, where you want to provide access, drinking water and sanitation for every single human being by 2030, right? So in regions such as Latin America now, the green taxonomy is becoming a key channel to actually finance sustainable technologies in ensuring that countries such as Brazil reach the moonshot goal of every single citizen in Brazil to have drinking water and sanitation there. I think we've seen some really encouraging signs even in India right now, where, they have some really interesting goals on reporting now. And if you look at the scale of a market like India and the transformative change that's going to bring about in these spaces is quite incredible, to the extent that I think they're going to even have their own the carbon market, which is setting up. So I think it's great that the EU Green Taxonomy has created this momentum, and hopefully, this will translate in the much needed financial instruments, because I think the transitions are going to be difficult. They're going to involve, significant investments. So the companies will need policies, interventions, which can support some of these financial instruments.
Indeed, I agree on that. It's also about when you have a common definition of sustainability or ESG, then it becomes easier to allocate investments, and that also minimizes greenwashing. So on that, and this recent case, which I was also discussing in one of my answers above. So these are very high-profile cases. One being of Volkswagen or HSBC's ad ban, where compliance failed to align claims with reality. So what lessons do you think, Frederick, we can draw to ensure that ESG commitments are not just promises, but also practices?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think I can give you a couple of examples, because I think when you look at ESG verification, we need to start understanding how you're going to track the entire value chain of these industries. There are some really interesting examples of how you can track plastics from source to use to recycling, and to even tackle with blockchain, right? And even metals, that's becoming a really interesting. Textiles is also a very interesting example. So I think when it comes to these elements, right, technology is going to play a key role. So we see digital sustainability as one of the key enablers. And when I look at the opportunity of digital sustainability, I talk about the 3 S's, right? About scale, speed, and stewardship. Because when you really see how you can bring in some digital tools of IoT, AI, and even blockchain, right? Very relevant, of course, because we know that some of these tools like AI have their own environmental concerns when it comes to water and energy, right? But they do have a certain role, when they can really drive change in these sectors.
Indeed, agreed on that. And with that, I think I'll hand over to Michael. But great points, and I see your love for frameworks, Frederick. 3P, 6P, 3S, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Have we lost Michael?
No, you haven't lost me, but I did have a few computer problems there. What I thought we would do, we are running so over. I think Bernard's gone again. I think Bernard's disappeared again. I thought what I would do is give you all 90 seconds to say anything that you've not said so far, which there's Bernard's back. Hang on. I'm sorry, I've got computer problems. There we are. Bernard, sorry, you're back again. I was just saying that we are running way over. What I thought I would do is give you each 90 seconds. Give you the floor, 90 seconds each, to say whatever you want to say within reason, but on what you perhaps haven't said so far. Is there anything important that you haven't said so far that you would like to say, or is there anything you'd like to emphasize that you consider to be particularly important? Sneha, you're next to me, so I'd like to propose that you answer that question first.
Well, I think looking at compliance from an activist pressure, also like driving compliance. So I think there's a lot of activist shareholder pressure over I think Barclays faced activist shareholder pressure over its financing of fossil fuels, which led to enhanced ESG disclosures. So I think compliance could be positioned as a mechanism for responding to shareholder activism largely, while aligning with long-term ESG strategies, because activists, they push for change, and compliance also ensures that commitments are implemented sustainably and without jeopardizing broader financial goals. So I think compliance here plays a very dual role in responding to external activism and also ensuring that internal processes are robust. So I think that's something we can take into account when you're talking about compliance or complicity or like lip service in lines with that.
Okay, thank you. And Bernard, would you like to? What haven't you talked about so far, which you would like to talk about? The floor is yours, starting from now. 90 seconds.
Sure. Thank you. So for me, my concern is more looking at voluntary compliance, right? In this part of the world, once again, a lot of the regulations have not been enforced mandatorily. And so some companies are looking at the possibility of complying voluntarily. And it strikes at the heart of the challenge that we have for ESG implementation. Now, whilst regulations are critical and they are very necessary for leveling the playing field and ensuring that companies do not even prioritize optics over the real impact, that is doing the real work, voluntary efforts are also very necessary. And I'll just leave some pattern knowledge on that if you want to go with voluntary compliance, what is important is not just looking at it as a way or creating an illusion of progress. I saw Leanne post a comment which was saying that ESG reports have become jazzy and they tend to distract from some of the real issues that some of these companies are creating. So the most important thing when there's no watchdog is to start internally, do a lot of work internally, have the right corporate leadership, be as transparent as possible, involve the local community, because a lot is hidden in darkness. But if you're able to bring it to light and involve the community, involve civil society and all, people are able to attest to the work that you're doing, right? And for businesses, getting third-party certification and assurance is also very, very important. It goes a long way to prove the work that you're doing, and then whether you're actually complying with some of these frameworks that are coming up or not. And also there are standards, like some of these ISO standards. Even recently, the ISO IWA 48 came up, which can help a lot of SMEs to implement the principles of ESG in their business to ensure that they have the triple bottom line that Frederick was speaking about earlier. They're able to balance it all together. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Ruchi, what would you like to talk? What haven't you discussed so far, which you feel itching to talk about, or what point would you like to emphasize?
Yeah, I think I would like to emphasize that when you look at a regulation, don't think that it's complex, don't think it's extensive and cannot be done. Look at it from a perspective which says that what is your obligation? What is the scope? What is the impact of not doing or doing it this way or that way? I think that is where the knowledge lies. That is the awareness that needs to be created so that everyone knows that yes, a regulation can be abided by, can be made compliant at your level, but it's just about your take on it, your perspective, the way you interpret it properly. So that is what is my key takeaway, and that I want to let all viewers know that this is how you should look at it. And then, of course, I think for an example, I just want to speak a little bit about how the regulations have evolved, and most importantly, about the waste management, the regulations around all of that. So just today, if you put anything on the market, the manufacturer is upfront asked to pay for how it will be disposed. So you do a payment already when you put it on the market towards a disposal. And this is just too good to do, because then you know that the waste disposal will be done in a right way. So I think this is just exactly how, we are solving a lot of complex problems also. That is what I want to highlight.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And finally, Frederick, you've got the last word. The floor is yours for 90 seconds to over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think when you look at ESG, we did a survey recently, and we asked why are companies charting on a journey towards sustainability. Interestingly, compliance wasn't the number one driver. Consumers was the number one, and then it was, of course, investors and the competitive edge. And we look at consumers, right? And something which we've not talked is, how do we get the younger generation on board on this ESG journey? Because if you talk, most of these things are going to happen in the next 5-10 years, right? I live in Wales. Wales is the first nation to have sustainability in the constitution. It's got a very interesting law called the Future Generations Act, where all these policies keep in mind the needs of the future generations, right? So I think that is a really untapped opportunity, because, where we get that part of the generation aware of the ESG aspects, its vision, its goal, and its aspects and its influence going forward, right? Because those would be the decision makers and the consumers who will be making the choice and also influencing change, both within these companies. So how do we engage with the younger generation right now and to make sure they can become part of this ESG journey going forward?
Okay, well, thank you for that. And thank you, everybody, today. We run out of time, but maybe we can do a follow-up at some stage, or maybe I can talk to you all on a one-to-one basis. We've got a big event planned at the end of March. Maybe we can squeeze in what we haven't talked about today and put it into that, perhaps. I don't know, but I'll be talking to you all afterwards. But thank you very, very much, everybody, for your time today. And as for the people watching this, see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks, everyone. Have a good day.